Welcome back to my Stranger Things diorama, and we are switching gears this video and focusing on the left side of the project. So, like I mentioned in the first video, Mike's basement is the main part of the piece, but then there are going to be 3 separate scenes on either side as well. So, the left side is going to be Vecna's clock. Here is a quick reference photo for you. And first thing I did was cut a piece of foam board to size, and I ripped off the paper on top to expose the foam, and I'm just going to use the end of a paintbrush to make my brick wall. There are, of course, several methods to making a brick wall. If I wanted to make a really realistic looking one, I would cut out the bricks individually and then use spackle or something similar to be the mortar. But in this case, since we're creating an interior school wall, this method is going to be perfect. Since the foam is so soft, it's super easy to create all of the indentations with the end of a paintbrush. And once I'm done, this is what it looks like. So far, so good. And this is the clock I'm going to use. He is going to go about there, just to give you a visual. I did purchase this on Etsy, but I'm definitely going to be giving him a bit of a makeover to make it look more like Vecna's clock. But before we can do that, we need to paint our wall. The wall is 3 different colors, and since the middle is the darkest, I'm taping that section off first so I can paint the top and bottom. Starting with the top section, I'm going to mix together these 2 colors to make a very pale gray. I'm also mixing in a little bit of Mod Podge with the paint just to seal everything together. Once I get my first layer of gray paint on, I'm going to go ahead and mix together a pale yellow for the bottom section. Ultimately, I think I did about 3 coats of the gray and the yellow, and now that they have dried, I'm going to go ahead and work on the middle section, which is a dark red. So I'm going to mix together these 2 colors. While the wall dries, let's go ahead and work on the clock. I sprayed it with a primer since I'm going to be painting over it. And like I mentioned earlier, we're going to go ahead and make a few adjustments to make it look more like Vecna's clock. I'm going to be using some toothpicks, some thin wooden dowels, and some tiny little beads. The first thing I want to do is cut the wooden dowels to size. I'm going to be adding these on either side of the little door. I'm also going to be adding those little beads on top of the dowel, so I'm gluing those down first. So I want to add these little, I'm not really sure what to call them, spikes, I guess, on top of the clock like I saw in the reference photo. And to do that, I'm going to use these little fake sprinkles. I used these for a different project, but they were the right shape and the right size. So I'm going to go ahead and glue these on top. This is what it looks like so far, and I'm going to let these dry completely before I move on. And once they're dry, I can go ahead and glue these little beads on top of each one. Again, I let those dry completely, and I cut the tips off of some toothpicks, and I'm going to glue those on top of the beads, and that will complete our little spikes. Now we're going to focus on the inside of the clock. There was a pendulum and some chains hanging inside, but I ripped them out because I need to make new ones. But before I do that, I'm going to paint the inside because obviously once I add those, it will be hard to do so. And I'm just going to paint it dark brown. And before I forget, I also need to cut out the shape of the clock because it's going to be coming out of the wall. So I'm going to position it where I want it and trace around it. And then I just cut it out with my X-Acto knife. Now I'm going to go ahead and work on the clock face. So I'm just grabbing my circle template and a piece of cardstock and just finding the right size circle to use. And I'm going to cut out a circle for the main clock face. In the reference photo, there is a smaller clock face above the larger one, so I'm cutting out a smaller circle for that one. Before I glue the clock face on, I need to paint the area where that is going to go. And I referenced a few different photos for this clock, and in every picture, this part was a different color. So I just kind of picked the color I liked the best, which was this kind of mustardy color. And while that was drying, I went ahead and painted the actual clock faces. And once those were dry, I went ahead and wrote on the Roman numerals with a ballpoint pen, and I was trying to make it as even as possible, but it's pretty hard writing this small. That's what it looks like so far, and now we have to add the hands. So to do that, I'm just going to use 2 small pieces of black wire and just gluing them in place with some tacky glue. Now we can glue those clock faces onto the actual clock. Now I'm going to make the pendulum and the weights that go inside of the clock. And I'm going to be using these little plastic paintbrush covers. When you buy new paintbrushes, these are like little sleeves that go on top of them, and they happen to be the perfect size. And I'm going to be using a wooden dowel, and I'm going to be gluing them together like so. I painted them gold, and while they're drying, I'm going to go ahead and paint the outside of the clock. And after the first coat of brown that I did, I decided that that color was actually way too light, so I did end up going in with the same dark brown that I used to paint the inside. And no shade to that brand of paint, but I had to go in with so many coats of brown because it is like the streakiest paint ever. I lost count of how many coats I actually had to do, but it's all good. It ended up looking just fine. Once the outside of my clock had dried, I went ahead and glued the chimes in. These were definitely a little bit finicky to get into place just because of the awkward space, and initially I used super glue, but it wasn't grabbing quick enough for me, so I scratched that and ended up using hot glue, which is not my first glue of choice, but I really wanted something that was going to set instantly, so that's what I ended up going with. And once they're all glued in, that's what they look like. So this clock has a little knob on the door and it opens, obviously, but based on my reference photos of Vecna's clock, there is no knob on the door, so I ended up ripping that out, and I'm just going to glue the door shut. I want to make it look like there is glass over the clock face, so I'm making a little template out of paper, and then I'm going to use that to cut out a little piece of plastic. I glued on the plastic, and this is what our clock is looking like so far. Basically, it's done, but I do want to age it just a little bit because I feel like it's looking a little bit too pristine. So I'm going to go in with some lighter shades of brown, and I'm just going to dry brush the corners and the edges a little bit just to make it look a little bit more worn. This is the finished product, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think it looks really good. I'm definitely happy that I aged it a little bit. I think that just makes it look even better. And now that the clock is done, we can finally start assembling our wall. So I'm going to be gluing the wall onto the project like so, but before I do that, I want to paint the floor. It's a really small sliver of floor, like it's barely going to show, but it's all about the details. So I definitely want to have it painted. And I'm just going to go in with a really light gray color to sort of match the top wall color. And because it's supposed to be a school floor, I thought it might be fun to make a sort of speckled floor. So I'm just flicking some black paint over the gray. And this is what it looks like once it's done. I'm going to go ahead and coat it in a gloss Mod Podge, and then we can glue the wall on. But before I do that, I need to add the cracks in the wall, and this is going to be much easier to do on a flat surface. So I'm just going to go in with a ballpoint pen, and I'm referencing the photo and just trying to kind of copy the cracks as best I can. Again, because this is foam, it's really easy to create the cracks with a pen. I don't really have to press down that hard. Now I can finally glue the wall on, which is very exciting, and I'm going to be using a mixture of Elmer's glue and hot glue. I mentioned this in a previous video, but the reason I use both is because the hot glue will bond everything instantly, so I don't have to like sit there and hold things in place. But over time, the Elmer's glue or tacky glue, whatever you want to use, will just be like a stronger bond. So that's why I like to do that method. And I actually learned that from Bentley House Minis. I will link her channel below. She literally taught me basically everything I know about making miniatures. She's amazing, and she does this all the time. So yeah, highly recommend checking her out. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and just clamp it anyway because the foam board was bowing a little bit. So I definitely want to make sure it straightens out. And we are going to let this dry. I'm going to glue in my clock, which I am really stoked about because that means that we are pretty much done with this side of the project. So yay. I'm just coating the back of it with some tacky glue, and then I'm just going to pop it in. I'm going to add a baseboard just to make it look more finished. So I just painted a piece of trim, like a very pale gray, and I'm just going to glue that in. I was going to leave it as is, but then I decided the wall was looking a little bit too clean and perfect. So I felt like it should be dirtied up a little. So I'm just going to shave down some chalk pastel, and I'm going to use this to age the wall. This is another tip I learned from Bentley House Minis, so I cannot take credit for it. But using chalk pastels to age things or like color them is a really great technique because it's very subtle. So you can really kind of build up the color and it looks really natural. I feel like especially if you're wanting to do kind of like dirt and grime and dust. And I'm going to use mostly brown, but then I'm also going to mix in some orange. And then I'm just going to start at the baseboards and add a little bit of the pastel mixture, and also going to go up at the corners of the walls. And you kind of want to think about where dirt and dust would accumulate. And I definitely want to hit all of the cracks and just kind of dirty everything up a little bit. Just make it look not so perfect, a little bit more lived in, so to speak. I feel like working with chalk pastels is very similar to using eyeshadow. Like, as long as you keep blending and blending, it's gonna look good. And here's the finished product. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think it looks really good. If you're wondering about the exposed foam core edges, those will all be covered up once the project is finished. Don't worry. But yeah, stay tuned for, I think it's part 6. Also, what did we think of the finale? Let me know in the comments below. And thanks for watching.